Close your eyes. Breathe in. Slowly. Exhale. Now imagine you are walking through a quiet valley at dusk. The mountains are glowing with the last light of the sun. The river moves like liquid silver, and the air carries the perfume of pine and earth. There is no noise here, no rush, no pressure, just silence, and the timeless voice of Lao Tzu, whispering across centuries, "Conquer yourself, and you are freer than kings." Tonight, we journey into one of the most mysterious books ever written, the Tao Te Ching. At first glance, its lines seem simple, almost childlike. Yet hidden within them is a radical message. If you want freedom, you must first let go of the ego, the restless, anxious self that clings, compares, and competes. This is not philosophy to debate in classrooms. This is philosophy to breathe in, to dream with, to drift asleep, to a path that guides you not toward more ambition, but toward less, until you find the riverbed of stillness beneath the turbulence of thought. Over the next few hours, I will guide you through Lao Tzu's life, his teachings, and the world he lived in. We'll wander through China's ancient landscapes, listen to his paradoxes, and explore what it means to live freely, gently, and authentically. So settle in. Place your head on the pillow. Allow your body to grow heavy, your mind soft. You are about to step into the current of the Tao. The valley was silent, save for the wind that curled softly around the cliffs, brushing against pine needles, and carrying with it the faint perfume of damp earth. If you imagine ancient China 2.5 millennia ago, you must picture a world far quieter than our own. No engines hummed in the distance. No lights glared through the night. Only the steady rhythm of rivers, the whisper of bamboo groves, and the songs of insects rising with dusk. It was here, in a landscape shaped by mountain and river, that Lao Tzu's vision began to form. His philosophy is inseparable from the land itself, as if each idea was carved from stone, carried by the current, or scattered with the seeds of wildflowers. To understand the Tao, the way, you must first place yourself inside this environment. Imagine standing on the banks of the Yellow River, the mother river of China, wide and restless, its waters carrying silt from faraway plateaus. Farmers tilled the fertile earth that it enriched, but they also knew its floods could sweep away entire villages overnight. This dual nature of nourishment and destruction shaped an understanding of life as balance. The gift and the danger, the fertile and the devastating, flowing together as one. When Lao Tzu described the Tao as being like water, gentle and yielding yet unstoppable, he was speaking from the memory of rivers that both gave life and claimed it. The mountains, too, spoke their lessons. Towering ranges like the Zhongnan or the Qinling stood as reminders of permanence and stillness. Their peaks disappeared into mist, their slopes cloaked in forests, alive with hidden streams and birdsong. From their silence came an invitation. Slow down, settle, watch. Unlike bustling towns where officials schemed and markets roared with trade, the mountains represented a deeper order. An order not imposed by men, but simply existing. In their presence, the ego shrinks, the noise dissolves, and a person can sense something vast and eternal. The natural world of ancient China was never seen as a backdrop, but as a living presence. Farmers read the patterns of the seasons as messages. Poets compared human struggles to storms and rivers, and hermits retreated into forests, not to escape life, but to find it. For Lao Tzu, the valley was more than a home. It was a teacher. Its lessons came quietly, The way a willow bends under snow and survives the winter, while stiff branches break. The way night returns each evening without resistance, and morning follows without struggle. At night in the valley, when fires had dimmed and people lay beneath the straw roofs of their homes, the stars stretched unbroken across the sky. To look upward was to confront infinity, the sheer scale of time and space, and to realize how brief and fragile a single life is. It was not a thought to be feared, but a reminder of humility. The Tao is vast, older than the oldest star, and the human ego, its ambitions, its greed, its desire to dominate, dissolves under such a sky. Here, freedom is not control, but surrender. The sounds of the valley wove themselves into this philosophy. The bamboo groves rattled softly in the breeze, never fighting the wind, only swaying with it. The cicadas sang unseen in the shadows, their short lives burning bright with song. The streams chuckled through stones, never arguing with the path, but shaping it gradually, over centuries. Each sound was like a verse of the Tao Te Ching, teaching not by argument, but by presence. Lao Tzu's ideas were not written in ink alone. They were carried in mist that rolled down from the mountains at dawn. They were carried in the scent of rain-soaked soil, in the quiet dignity of the ox, in the fragile petals of the lotus rising clean from muddy waters. He observed, he absorbed, and from these simple acts of attention came a philosophy that whispered, life is not to be conquered, but lived in harmony. And so, when you hear his words about water, about yielding, about emptiness, imagine the valley. Imagine the silence of dawn when the first birds stir, the coolness of the river, the warmth of sun on stones. Imagine a world where nature was not separate from human life, but interwoven, where wisdom was not sought in libraries, but in clouds, in soil, in rivers that never ceased flowing. This was the cradle of Lao Tzu's vision, a valley that breathed not with the effort of men, but with the timeless rhythm of the earth. It is said that if you truly wish to understand Lao Tzu, do not first read his book. Instead, sit quietly by a river until you no longer hear your thoughts above the sound of water. Then, perhaps, you will begin to understand why the ancient valley mattered and why it still matters now. The mystery of Lao Tzu begins with silence. Unlike Confucius, whose life is recorded with detailed conversations and historical notes, Lao Tzu slips through history like mist sliding between mountains. Was he a real man, or a name given to a collection of wisdom? Did he live in the 6th century BCE, or centuries later? Scholars argue, but the truth remains elusive. And perhaps that is precisely the point. Legends tell us he was an old man with wise eyes, serving as the keeper of records in the Zhou dynasty court. He is said to have grown weary of the noise, the corruption, the endless striving of officials. Disillusioned, he mounted a water buffalo and rode westward, away from the cities, toward the mountains and the silence of the frontier. At the border, a guard recognized him and pleaded, "Before you leave, write down your wisdom, so it will not vanish with you." Lao Tzu agreed, and in a few short days composed the Tao Te Ching, a work of fewer than 6,000 characters that would outlive empires. Then he disappeared, leaving nothing behind but his words. But this story is less history than parable. Did it happen? We cannot be certain. And yet the uncertainty is itself a teaching. Lao Tzu tells us again and again that the Tao cannot be grasped, cannot be pinned down, cannot be named. Why should his own life be any different? He lives in fragments, in whispers, in paradoxes, just like the Tao he described. Other tales claim he lived for over 100 years, wandering the countryside as a hermit, teaching in secret. Some stories say he was born already old, with white hair and a long beard, a child sage who had wisdom from the moment he opened his eyes. Still others suggest he was never one person at all, but a composite figure, a name given to the ancient oral traditions that valued simplicity, humility, and harmony with nature. The mystery of his life has long frustrated historians, but has delighted seekers. Because the absence of facts does something unusual. It forces us to look beyond biography. With Confucius, one studies his career, his teachings, his disciples. With Lao Tzu, you confront only a slim, enigmatic book and the silence of the ages. The text is not illuminated by knowledge of the author, but rather it illuminates you, the reader. Who he was matters less than who you are when you encounter the Tao Te Ching. In this way, Lao Tzu's mystery functions as a mirror. When you hear his words, you cannot rely on a story of his life to explain them. You must face them yourself, just as you must face the Tao yourself. His disappearance into legend invites us to practice what he preached. Let go of the need to control, to know, to pin down. Accept that life is made of clouds and flowing rivers, never fixed, always shifting, and yet the legends themselves carry meaning. The image of the weary sage leaving the court on a buffalo is a story of renunciation, of choosing the quiet path over the noisy one. It shows us that wisdom is not found in positions of power, but in walking away from them. The tale of his birth as an old man reminds us that wisdom is not bound by time, that the deepest truths feel ancient, even when newly discovered. If you try to reconstruct his life, you will always meet contradiction. But if you accept the contradictions, you begin to see how they align with his teaching. The Tao Te Ching tells us the Tao is nameless, formless, and eternal. Likewise, Lao Tzu himself becomes nameless, formless, eternal. Not a man to be studied, but a voice that moves through centuries. And perhaps that is why his philosophy remains fresh. Because there is no single story, no rigid doctrine, he cannot be confined to one age, one culture, one interpretation. He belongs to whoever reads him, just as the Tao belongs to whoever breathes. The mystery is not a barrier, but an opening, allowing his words to slip past history and into the timeless present. So when you think of Lao Tzu, think less of a figure standing in history and more of a ripple in water. The ripple has no origin point you can fix your finger upon, yet it moves, it touches, it spreads. In this sense, the mystery is not ignorance. It is the very essence of the lesson. The story begins with a road that fades into the western frontier of ancient China. Dust rises gently from the hooves of a weary water buffalo, carrying an old man whose eyes, it is said, had seen enough of the world. His hair flowed like white threads of cloud, and his beard reached his chest, moving with the rhythm of his breath. This figure was Lao Tzu, the archivist of the Zhou dynasty, a keeper of scrolls and records, but also a man of silence. He had lived long among the courts, seen the endless intrigues of officials, the posturing of nobles, and the ceaseless chatter of those who claimed to know the truth of how to govern men. For years, he endured the noise, but gradually, it is told, his heart grew tired. He had seen ambition consume families, seen greed rot friendships, and seen how the louder people spoke, the less they seemed to understand. One day, perhaps without even planning it, he decided to leave. He gathered his few belongings, mounted the buffalo, and began to ride westward, away from the palace, away from the cities, away from the restless noise of men who believed themselves in control. His path led toward the mountains, toward the border where the known world ended and the wilderness began. As the legend goes, when he reached the western gate of the empire, he was stopped by the guardian of the pass. The man's name, history tells us, was Yingxi, though names shift with time. Yingxi was not merely a guard of stone walls and wooden gates. He was a seeker himself, a man who had listened to travelers from every corner of the land and had come to recognize wisdom when it passed before him. When he saw Lao Tzu, he felt that he was standing before more than an old man. He felt the presence of a sage. He bowed and spoke, "Master, if you leave now, your wisdom will vanish with you. The world will be poorer for it. Before you disappear into the mountains, give us your teaching. Write down your understanding of the way, so those who remain behind may not be entirely blind." Lao Tzu hesitated. To him, words were like nets, always failing to capture the living fish of truth. To name the Tao was already to move away from it. Yet the sincerity in Yingxi's request touched him. Perhaps, he thought, a few verses might serve as lanterns in the dark. Not a map, for the Tao cannot be mapped, but a set of hints, gestures, riddles that point beyond themselves. And so, beneath the quiet of the border, Lao Tzu began to write. He did not compose a heavy tome filled with elaborate arguments. He did not dictate laws or commandments. Instead, he wrote in brief verses, aphorisms like droplets of water falling onto stone. Simple words, but with depths that never end. Over the course of a few days, he composed what we now know as the Tao Te Ching, a text of fewer than 6,000 characters, yet vast enough to contain an entire philosophy, an entire vision of life. It is said that once the book was complete, he handed it to Yingxi, mounted his buffalo once again, and continued westward into the silence, never to be seen again. He left behind no temple, no disciples who would carry his name, no monuments of stone. He left only this thin scroll of paradoxes. And yet that fragile scroll outlasted kings, dynasties, and empires. The Tao Te Ching does not read like a normal book. It has no beginning, no end, no argument that moves in straight lines. Instead, it is like walking through a garden where each stone, each tree, each bend of the path reveals something unexpected. One verse says that the Tao is like water, nourishing all things without competing. Another says that the greatest fullness seems empty, the greatest clarity seems obscure. Another tells us that power comes from yielding, that life comes from death, that presence comes from absence. To some, these verses read like riddles. To others, they feel like lullabies, soothing because they remind us that we do not need to know everything. Each line resists final interpretation. The Tao Te Ching is not a set of answers, but a set of doors. You walk through one and find yourself in a new landscape. And just as you think you understand it, another door appears, leading you further in. And that was the gift Lao Tzu left behind at the border. Not certainty, but mystery. Not rigid instruction, but guidance towards silence. His book is less like a law code and more like a stream. You can drink from it in one sip or sit beside it for a lifetime. No matter how many times you return, it never says the same thing twice, because you are never the same reader twice. The birth of the Tao Te Ching is not only a story of an old man writing verses at a frontier. It is a symbol of the way wisdom itself works. It comes not from the center of power, but from the edges. It arises not in the noise of debate, but in the hush of departure. It is written not in heavy volumes, but in whispers. And so, the Tao Te Ching continues to move across centuries. A little book, born at a border, carried by wind and time, always pointing us toward a truth that cannot be contained. The Tao is a word, and yet it is not. The moment you say it, you already move away from it. Lao Tzu opens his book with this very paradox. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. And yet, to point at it, to gesture, is the best we can do. Imagine water. Watch how it moves through the world. It flows to the lowest places, where others will not go. It nourishes every root, every stone, without complaint, without pride. When it meets a rock, it does not argue. It simply flows around, and in time, it shapes the rock itself. Water is soft, yet nothing is stronger. To understand the Tao, begin with this image. Life is not about forcing your way, but about moving with the contours, finding the path that is already open, and in doing so, becoming unstoppable. But the Tao is also emptiness. Think of a clay pot. Its usefulness lies not in the walls of clay, but in the empty space within. Without that emptiness, it would hold nothing. Think of a room. Its walls and beams make the structure, but it is the empty space that allows you to live inside it. Emptiness is not nothingness, it is possibility. The Tao is that fertile emptiness from which all things arise. And yet, the Tao is also mystery. It is the rhythm beneath opposites, the pulse behind night and day, life and death, fullness and emptiness. It is not a God who commands, not a law that punishes, not a thing that can be possessed. It is the nameless origin, the silent mother of all that exists. When you try to grasp it, it slips away. But when you stop trying, you feel it everywhere. In the breeze on your cheek, in the stillness between your thoughts, in the rise and fall of your breath. Lao Tzu tells us that the Tao gives birth to one gives birth to two gives birth to three, and three gives birth to the 10,000 things. These numbers are not mathematics, but poetry. They describe the unfolding of reality itself. The way from unity comes duality. From duality comes harmony. And from harmony arises the vast world of diversity. The Tao is the source, the spring from which all streams flow. To live with the Tao is to stop fighting against the current. Most of us thrash in the water, trying to swim upstream, exhausting ourselves. The Tao teaches us to float, not to be passive, but to trust the deeper rhythm that carries us. It teaches us that resistance brings suffering, but harmony brings peace. Consider the bamboo in a storm. The oak tree may be rigid and proud, standing tall and unbending. But when the winds grow fierce, its branches snap. The bamboo bends, yields, sways with the storm, and when the wind is gone, it rises again. This is the way of the Tao. Yielding does not mean weakness. It means resilience. To those who crave control, the Tao feels frustrating. It does not offer certainty or plans. But that is because life itself is uncertain. Control is an illusion. The Tao invites us to see what is already present, to align ourselves with it, rather than imposing our will. It is the way of the valley, which receives every stream, not because it demands, but because it is open. And when you surrender to the Tao, a strange thing happens. Life no longer feels like a battle. Each moment becomes a dance. Each breath becomes enough. The ego, always restless, always demanding, begins to soften. You find joy, not in conquering, but in being. This is what the Tao means when it says that the soft overcomes the hard. The empty holds the full. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. It is not doctrine. It is the gentle reminder that freedom comes when you stop forcing, and wisdom comes when you stop clinging. So what is the Tao? It is the water flowing through every valley, the emptiness in every vessel, the silence in every pause. It is the rhythm that holds the stars and the pulse that moves through your own breath. You cannot capture it. You can only live it. The ego is like a restless animal pacing inside the mind, forever unsatisfied, forever searching for something just beyond reach. In Lao Tzu's time, just as in our own, people sought status, wealth, recognition, the approval of others. They wanted to be remembered, to rise above, to control their surroundings, and to be seen as important. Yet beneath all of that striving lay an unease that never vanished, no matter how much was achieved. This unease is the shadow of the ego. The Tao Te Ching often speaks of humility, of being like water that flows to the lowest places. It praises the valley over the mountain peak, the empty vessel over the full one, the silent sage over the boastful ruler. Why? Because in emptiness and lowliness, the ego dissolves. In silence, the self ceases to demand. In humility, peace becomes possible. But as long as the ego is fed, peace is pushed further away, like a horizon that recedes as you walk toward it. Imagine a court official in ancient China, one of the many men Lao Tzu must have observed in his years as an archivist. The official sits in embroidered robes, speaking loudly of his accomplishments, boasting of his strategies for controlling others. Outwardly, he seems powerful. Inwardly, he is enslaved to the endless need to protect his image, to maintain his reputation, to secure more praise tomorrow than he received today. If he stumbles, if he is criticized, his world collapses. He is not free, because his entire being depends on something outside himself, the fragile approval of others. This is the trap of the ego. The ego is the voice that says, "I am separate." It builds walls between self and other, creating distance where there could be connection. It whispers, "I must be stronger, richer, wiser, more admired." But every time you satisfy one demand, another arises, louder and sharper. The ego is a hunger that never ends. The Tao, by contrast, invites you to let go of the illusion of separation. It says that just as a river is not separate from the sea, you are not separate from the world around you. Your breath comes from the trees, your food from the soil, your thoughts from a language you did not invent. When the ego dissolves, you see this clearly, and suddenly the pressure to prove yourself fades. But letting go of ego is difficult, for it hides in subtle places. It disguises itself as ambition, as pride, even as virtue. Someone may appear generous, but inside, they are feeding their image as a generous person. Another may appear humble, but inside, they are proud of their humility. The ego is clever, endlessly reinventing itself. Lao Tzu's wisdom cuts through this by refusing to play its game. He does not say, "Be virtuous so you will be admired." He says, "Be like water." Water does not seek recognition. It does not announce its deeds. It nourishes all things without claiming credit. And in this selflessness, it finds true power. The problem of the ego is not only that it creates suffering for the individual, it also poisons relationships and societies. When rulers act from ego, they seek domination, war, and conquest. When merchants act from ego, they exploit. When families act from ego, love is replaced by competition. The Tao Te Ching points to a different way. The ruler who governs so gently that the people hardly realize they are being governed. The leader who places himself last and therefore comes first. The person who loses their sense of self and therefore finds themselves truly. To hear this teaching as you lie in bed is to recognize that the same restlessness that keeps you awake at night, the racing thoughts, the worry about what others think. The desire to be more tomorrow than you are today comes from the same ego that Lao Tzu warned against. When you see it clearly, you can smile gently at it, and then let it pass, like a cloud drifting through the sky. What remains when the cloud is gone is stillness, presence, the spaciousness of the Tao. And so, the ego is the obstacle, but also the invitation. Every time you feel yourself pulled into comparison, into desire, into fear of losing status, you are being offered a chance to practice what Lao Tzu taught, to step back, to become small, to empty yourself. The problem of the ego is real, but the cure is simple. Not easy, but simple. It is to stop trying to be important, and instead, to be, to breathe, to yield, to let go, and to live in harmony with what already is. Effortless action. The phrase itself sounds like a contradiction. How can one act without effort? How can anything be achieved without striving? Yet this is the heart of one of Lao Tzu's most beautiful teachings, Wu Wei. To understand it, you must picture again the movement of water. Water does not struggle to flow. It does not argue with gravity or complain about the shape of the land. It simply moves, finding the path that is open. It slips between rocks, curves around obstacles, and gathers in low places. In time, it wears down even mountains. This is Wu Wei. Action without forcing, strength without strain, progress without violence. In life, so much of our suffering comes from forcing. We force our bodies to work beyond their limits. We force conversations, pushing words where silence would suffice. We force our plans upon others, insisting that things must unfold according to our schedule. In forcing, we create resistance, and resistance creates pain. Wu Wei offers another way. It invites us to move with the current rather than against it, to align with the natural rhythm of things. Think of a musician deeply immersed in playing an instrument. Their fingers glide effortlessly. Their body sways with the rhythm. The music seems to flow through them rather than from them. They are not straining. They are not calculating each note. They are in harmony with the moment. That is Wu Wei. Think of a skilled craftsman shaping wood. The tools move almost by themselves, guided by years of practice and by attention so complete that the craftsman disappears into the work. Again, that is Wu Wei. For Lao Tzu, Wu Wei was not laziness or passivity. It was the art of knowing when to act and when not to, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to step forward and when to step aside. It is the balance between doing and allowing. To live with Wu Wei is to recognize that life has its own rhythm, just as the seasons turn and rivers flow. You do not need to force the spring blossoms to open. They will open on their own. You do not need to demand the snow to fall. It will fall when the time comes. The rulers of Lao Tzu's time often governed through force laws, punishments, armies, decrees. But the Tao Te Ching praised the ruler who practiced Wu Wei, leading so gently that the people felt free, guiding so subtly that they believed they had guided themselves. When the best leader's work is done, it says, the people say, "We did it ourselves." This is effortless action, shaping without imposing, guiding without controlling, creating without claiming ownership. Wu Wei can be practiced in the smallest details of life. Breathing, for instance. Notice how, when you stop trying to control your breath, it finds its own rhythm. Notice how, when you soften your grip on your thoughts, they float away on their own. Notice how, when you stop clenching your heart, Love arises naturally. You do not need to force kindness. You do not need to force peace. You only need to let go of what blocks them. As you listen now, perhaps lying in bed, your body heavy and relaxed, you can feel Wu Wei in action. The world does not need you to force your dreams tonight. Sleep will come as the river flows, as the night deepens. You need only allow it. In this way, even the act of resting becomes an example of the Tao. And when you awaken tomorrow, Wu Wei will still be with you. It will be in the way you sip tea without rushing, the way you listen to another without needing to interrupt, the way you walk through the world without trying to dominate it. You may still face challenges, but instead of attacking them head-on, you may flow around them, as water does. You may bend, as bamboo bends, and thus remain unbroken. To live like this is not weakness. It is the deepest strength. The hardest stone cracks under pressure, but water endures. The tyrant may control for a time, but the gentle eventually prevail. Wu Wei reminds us that life itself is not a battle to be won, but a dance to be joined. And the more lightly we step, the more easily we move, the more beautiful the dance becomes. This is the power of effortless action. To move without forcing, to live without strain, to be like water, always yielding, always patient, and yet always arriving where it is meant to go. In the heart of a storm, you can hear the difference between what bends and what resists. The thunder rolls, the wind howls, and the rain lashes down like whips upon the land. Trees stand tall in defiance. Some hold their ground, but some, proud and stiff, break under the force. Yet in the same storm, you will see bamboo, thin stalks, fragile in appearance, swaying with every gust, bending until their leaves nearly touch the earth, and then rising back again once the winds pass. This is the image that Lao Tzu held close when he spoke of softness overcoming hardness. To the ordinary mind, it seems backwards. Surely it is the strong oak with its thick trunk that lasts, and the slender bamboo that is most vulnerable. But nature, in its patient way, reveals a deeper truth. Hardness may win in the short moment, but softness endures over time. When Lao Tzu looked at the world of rulers and generals, he saw men who prided themselves on strength. They believed power meant force, domination, the ability to crush enemies, to impose laws, to stand immovable. Yet how often did these rulers fall? How often did their empires, built on steel and rigidity, collapse into dust within a generation? And how often did the people, ordinary and soft, endure quietly through those storms of politics? Surviving rulers, the way bamboo survives storms by yielding, by being flexible, by knowing when to bend. Softness is not weakness. It is adaptability, resilience, the wisdom to let go rather than shatter. The newborn child is soft and supple, yet it grows into life. The corpse is stiff and hard, because it has lost the fluidity of living. This is why Lao Tzu taught that life is found in softness, while death clings to rigidity. Think of water again. You can strike it with your hand, and it yields instantly. You cannot cut it with a knife, cannot grasp it in your fist, yet it wears down cliffs, hollows, valleys, and carves canyons. It is soft, but it defeats the hardest stone simply by being itself, flowing with patience, never rushing, never forcing, but never stopping. When you reflect on your own life, you may see how often hardness has failed you. The times you tried to hold too tightly to a plan, only for it to crumble. The times you refused to change, and life changed anyway, dragging you painfully along. The times you fought circumstances, exhausting yourself, when a gentler approach might have carried you through. Rigidity feels safe, but it is fragile. Softness feels vulnerable, but it is enduring. To practice softness is not to abandon strength, but to redefine it. True strength is not the armor that cracks under pressure, but the openness that survives every blow. True strength is the quiet flexibility of the spirit, the ability to bend with change, to adjust, to yield, without losing essence. Imagine lying down in your bed as the wind blows outside. You may hear the rain tapping on the window, the branches brushing against the house. Somewhere, a tree may be groaning under the strain. And yet, you are reminded of bamboo swaying. That image becomes a lesson in how to live. Bend, and you will not break. Yield, and you will remain whole. Lao Tzu's wisdom asks us to admire softness, not as a weakness to outgrow, but as a strength to cultivate. The world praises hardness, ambition, and domination, but the Tao praises the yielding, the subtle, the gentle. Just as the valley is honored because it receives all rivers, so softness is honored because it endures all storms. In your own stillness tonight, you might imagine yourself as bamboo in the wind. Your body, supple and relaxed, bends with the rhythm of your breath. Your thoughts, once stiff and resistant, soften, sway, and release. In this yielding, there is no defeat. There is only the quiet power of resilience, the truth that softness overcomes hardness, not by force, but by patience, by openness, by the secret strength of letting go. In the stillness of night, take a moment to imagine a cup, a simple clay vessel, unadorned, sitting quietly on a wooden table. At first glance, its value seems to lie in the clay itself, in its form, its sturdiness, the craftsmanship that shaped it. But look closer, and you realize the real usefulness of the cup lies in what is not there, the emptiness within. Without that empty space, the cup would hold nothing. Without emptiness, the cup would not be a cup. This is how Lao Tzu invites us to understand emptiness, not as a void of despair, but as potential, as capacity, as the open space in which life can flow. We often fill ourselves endlessly with thoughts, possessions, noise, and desire. We fear emptiness because it feels like lack. But the Tao Te Ching reminds us that emptiness is the beginning of usefulness. The hollow of a flute makes music possible. The space in a window makes a house livable. The silence between notes makes the song beautiful. Emptiness is not nothing. It is possibility. When you empty a vessel, you prepare it to receive. When you empty the mind, you make space for wisdom to arise. When you empty the heart, you open it for love and compassion to flow in freely. Lao Tzu's teaching is clear. To be full of yourself is to leave no room for the Tao. To be empty is to allow the Tao to enter. Think of your daily life. How often do you rush to fill every moment with sound, every silence with chatter, every pause with activity? The ego fears stillness because stillness feels like emptiness. But in chasing constant fullness, we leave no space for the gentle presence of the Tao to move within us. In filling ourselves, we become heavy. In emptying, we become light. The Taoist sage practices emptiness like one tends a garden, not by force, but by gentle clearing away. A thought arises, and he lets it drift like a cloud. A desire appears, and he watches it dissolve. Gradually, the mind becomes spacious, like a valley open to the sky, and in that spaciousness, insight blossoms without effort. Emptiness also teaches humility. A cup that is already full cannot be filled. A mind already certain cannot learn. A heart already crowded cannot love freely. Only in emptiness do we remain open, receptive, teachable. This is why Lao Tzu praised the beginner, the uncarved block, the valley that lies low. In emptiness, there is openness. And in openness, there is infinite potential. Imagine yourself as a cup tonight. You may feel that your day has filled you to the brim tasks, worries, conversations, memories. But now, as you breathe slowly, you tip the cup, gently pouring out the contents. With each breath, you empty a little more. The chatter of the day drains away. The tightness of your chest releases. Your mind, once crowded, grows still. And in that stillness, you discover space. A space that is not frightening, but peaceful. Not hollow, but alive with possibility. The Tao teaches us that the greatest fullness often appears empty. Think of the night sky. Its vastness is not nothing, it is the womb of stars, the endless space that allows galaxies to exist. Without its emptiness, there would be no beauty, no depth, no wonder. When you look into the sky, you do not despair at its emptiness. You marvel at its vastness, and so it is with the emptiness within yourself. To embrace emptiness is to trust that the universe knows how to fill what is open. You do not need to grasp or force. You need only make space. Just as the farmer clears weeds to make room for crops, you clear clutter from your spirit to make room for the Tao. And when you do, life begins to flow into you in ways you could never have predicted. So as you drift into rest, imagine yourself not as something heavy and overfull, but as something light and spacious. A cup ready to be filled, a room ready to be lived in, a sky ready to receive the stars. In that emptiness, you find peace. In that peace, you find freedom. And in that freedom, you discover the endless potential of the Tao, always ready to fill what is open, always ready to flow where there is space. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu speaks of leaders whose presence is barely felt. The highest rulers, he says, are those who are hardly known by their people. When their work is complete and their task is fulfilled, the people say, "We did it ourselves." This is the quiet strength of humility, a strength that does not demand recognition, a strength that shapes without leaving fingerprints. It seems almost paradoxical in a world where leadership is usually associated with visibility, authority, and command. Yet Lao Tzu knew that the truest leaders are those who do not seek the spotlight, who govern with such subtlety that harmony arises naturally, without fanfare. Humility in Taoist thought is not about shrinking or hiding. It is about stepping aside so that the Tao can flow through you. The humble leader recognizes that they are not the source of order, but a conduit. They understand that life, society, and nature already possess their own balance, and their task is not to impose control, but to allow that balance to express itself. Just as a farmer does not grow crops by shouting at the seeds, but by preparing the soil and letting the natural process unfold, the humble leader does not force results. They create conditions in which growth happens on its own. This humility can appear invisible, but its effects are profound. Think of a river valley. The valley lies low, unnoticed compared to the high mountains. Yet every stream flows into it. Because it is humble, it gathers. Because it does not resist, it nourishes. A leader with humility is like that valley, quiet, receptive, yet essential for the life of the community. Their power comes not from elevation but from emptiness, from the willingness to hold space for others. Contrast this with the proud ruler. the one who seeks recognition and control. Their commands echo loudly. Their statues are built tall. Their victories are shouted in the streets. And yet, history remembers how often such rulers fell. Pride creates opposition. Force breeds resentment. When people feel dominated, they may obey outwardly, but inwardly, they resist. The harmony is false, brittle, and easily shattered. The humble leader avoids this fate because they do not dominate. They guide lightly, leaving room for others to feel their own dignity, their own responsibility. Humility is also a form of wisdom. The arrogant believe they know all things, and so they close themselves off from learning. The humble admit their ignorance, and in that openness they continue to grow. The arrogant seek to shine above others, but in doing so they isolate themselves. The humble step back, and in that lowering they connect more deeply. The arrogant are rigid, brittle under pressure. The humble are flexible, resilient, able to adapt because they do not cling to their own importance. Lao Tzu's vision of leadership was not limited to kings and rulers. It applies to families, communities, friendships, even the leadership of one's own life. You lead with humility when you listen more than you speak, when you allow others to shine, when you do not need credit for what is achieved. In humility, you become like water, indispensable, nourishing, yet unnoticed as it flows. Imagine lying quietly in your bed, reflecting on those who have shaped your life most deeply. Often, they are not the loudest voices, not the ones who demanded attention. They may be the teacher who believed in you quietly, without needing to be praised, the friend who listened without judgment, the family member who supported you without condition. Their influence was gentle, invisible almost, yet lasting. This is the strength of humility. In the stillness of night, humility whispers that you do not need to prove yourself to be valuable. You do not need to rise above others to matter. True strength is not in being noticed, but in being aligned with what is right. When you embrace humility, the burden of ego lifts. You stop striving for recognition, and in that surrender, you discover a freedom deeper than applause. You become like the best leaders of Lao Tzu's vision, almost invisible, but quietly transformative. Nature has always been humanity's first teacher. Long before books, before philosophy, before temples and schools, people looked to the sky, the mountains, the rivers, the clouds. They watched, they listened, and in silence they learned. Lao Tzu's philosophy was inseparable from these lessons. He did not invent principles and impose them on the world. He observed the world and discovered principles already there. The Tao is written in mountains and rivers more clearly than in ink. Consider the river. It flows endlessly, never pausing, never clinging. It finds the low ground, the humble places, nourishing every field along its way. When a rock stands in its path, the river does not resist. It moves around patiently, persistently, until the rock itself is worn smooth. Here is a lesson in patience, in adaptability, in persistence, without aggression. To live like the river is to move steadily, not hurriedly, to nourish without pride, to yield without losing strength. Now imagine the mountains, towering, silent, unmoved by storm or season. They remind us of stillness, of stability, of perspective that stretches beyond the human scale. The mountains do not speak, yet they teach endurance. They teach us that life is more than the noise of today, that truth endures beyond the passing winds of opinion and ambition. Standing before a mountain, you realize how small your worries are, how fleeting your desires. You are invited into humility, into stillness. Then look at the clouds drifting across the sky. They form, they dissolve, they change shape without clinging to any one form. One moment they are dark and heavy with rain. The next, they are light and scattered across blue. The clouds remind us of impermanence, of the beauty of change. They do not resist transformation. They embody it. When you learn from the clouds, you discover the wisdom of letting go, of allowing yourself to change with the seasons of life, rather than holding tightly to an identity that no longer serves you. In rivers, mountains, and clouds, Lao Tzu saw reflections of the Tao. He saw how nature acts without striving, teaches without speaking, endures without pride. The Tao is not separate from these forms of nature, it is their essence. By watching, by aligning, by living as they live, we come closer to the Tao ourselves. Tonight, as you listen, you may picture yourself beside a river. The current carries fallen leaves gently away. You hear the water against the stones, steady, unhurried. You feel the mountain behind you, vast and silent, holding the valley in its embrace. Above you, clouds drift across the night sky, dissolving into darkness. Each element teaches you something. The river teaches you to flow. The mountain teaches you to be still. The clouds teach you to let go. And together, they remind you that you are part of the same Tao, the same unfolding, the same rhythm. Nature, as teacher, does not use words. It does not argue. It simply shows. And in its showing, it guides us back to what we already know deep within. That life is not about grasping, but about flowing. Not about conquering, but about harmonizing. Not about holding forever, but about yielding to change. The Tao moves in rivers, in mountains, in clouds, and it moves in you. If you allow yourself to listen, control is a comforting illusion. From the moment we wake, we feel the tug of it. We plan our schedules, arrange our tasks, manage our conversations, and think that in doing so, we are masters of our lives. Yet beneath this sense of control lies a deeper truth that Lao Tzu saw clearly. Most of what happens is beyond our grasp. The sun rises and sets without our permission. The seasons shift regardless of our will. Our bodies breathe, digest, heal, and age, not because we command them to, but because life moves through us. Even our thoughts, the very symbols of control, often arise unbidden, drifting like clouds across the sky of the mind. To cling to control is to fight against the current of the Tao. It is to believe that by holding tighter, the river will obey us. But rivers do not obey. They flow where they must. The Tao teaches not that we should abandon action, but that we should abandon the illusion of absolute control. Freedom is not in mastery, but in surrender. Imagine holding sand in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more grains slip through your fingers. Only when you loosen your grip does the sand remain. Life is much the same. When we attempt to force outcomes, to guarantee security, to dominate every detail, we often create more loss, more frustration, more exhaustion. When we soften, when we release, when we accept that we cannot hold everything, we discover that life supports us in ways we did not expect. Surrender is not defeat. It is alignment. The sailor does not command the wind, but adjusts the sail to move with it. The farmer does not control the rain, but plants in season and trusts the rhythms of the earth. To surrender is to recognize that there is a larger order, a deeper current, and that our peace comes not from resisting it, but from moving with it. The Tao Te Ching reminds us that the world is sacred and cannot be improved by interference. To meddle with it is to lose it. To grasp is to lose. The sage, therefore, takes no forced action, and everything falls into place. In surrender, there is trust, not blind trust, but a quiet recognition that the Tao has always moved, will always move, and that we are part of it. In our own lives, control often masquerades as safety. We think, if I can control this relationship, I will not be hurt. If I can control my future, I will not fail. If I can control what others think, I will not be rejected. Yet none of these can truly be controlled. People change. Circumstances shift. Opinions wander like the wind. By trying to fix them in place, we suffer. By letting go, we breathe. Lao Tzu's wisdom is not that we should do nothing, but that we should act without forcing, without clinging, without demanding. This is surrender. It is the strength of water, flowing where it is guided, nourishing everything it touches, without needing to dictate the course. When we let go of control, we discover not weakness, but ease. We discover freedom. As you lie in bed tonight, notice the places where you are holding on too tightly. Perhaps your shoulders are tense, your jaw clenched, your mind spinning with worries. Gently release them, like setting down a heavy bag at the end of a long journey. The bag is not yours to carry into sleep. The river will flow, whether you grasp at it or not. The stars will shine without your command. Life does not need your control in order to unfold. In surrender, you find rest. In surrender, you find peace. Simplicity is a paradox. At first, it seems like less wealth, less power, fewer possessions, fewer distractions. To the restless ego, simplicity feels like deprivation. But to Lao Tzu, simplicity was not a lack. It was a return to essence, a fullness deeper than all accumulation. The simple life is not shallow, but profound. It is the life that strips away excess so that what matters can shine. Consider a clear pool of water. When the surface is cluttered with leaves and debris, it is hard to see the depths. But when the pool is still and clean, its clarity reveals what lies beneath. Simplicity is that clarity. It removes the noise so that truth can be seen. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu praises the uncarved block, the simple piece of wood, before it is cut into shapes. In its plainness, it holds infinite potential. Once carved and decorated, its uses are limited. In remaining simple, it remains vast. The paradox of simplicity is that the fewer things you cling to, the richer you become. When you are no longer burdened by endless possessions, each object you own carries deeper meaning. When your schedule is not crammed with tasks, the few things you choose to do become sacred. When your heart is not divided by countless desires, the love you hold is deeper, steadier, freer. Simplicity also teaches freedom from comparison. In a world of endless striving, simplicity whispers that enough is enough. The Tao does not urge us to accumulate endlessly, but to rest in sufficiency, to eat when hungry, to drink when thirsty, to sleep when tired, to find joy in the ordinary. A cup of tea, the sound of rain, the warmth of a blanket. These are not lesser joys. They are the deepest, because they require no performance, no competition, no pretense. To live simply is not to reject beauty, but to discover beauty in its truest form. The mountain is beautiful, not because it is adorned, but because it is itself. The river is beautiful not because it strives, but because it flows. The cloud is beautiful, not because it is permanent, but because it drifts freely. The simple life mirrors this: beauty without excess, depth without clutter, peace without striving. At night, when the noise of the world fades, simplicity reveals itself most clearly. The darkness, the quiet, the steady rhythm of breath, all simple, all profound. You do not need wealth or power to rest in that stillness. You need only to stop chasing what is unnecessary. In that stopping, in that returning, you find the Tao. Lao Tzu saw that complexity often hides emptiness. Grand palaces, heavy laws, elaborate rituals, they impress the eye, but often conceal hollowness. Simplicity, by contrast, reveals fullness. The smallest hut can hold deep peace if the heart inside is free from grasping. The simplest meal can bring nourishment if eaten with gratitude. The quietest life can shine with wisdom if lived in alignment with the Tao. So the paradox is this: simplicity is not less. It is more. By emptying, you are filled. By yielding, you are strong. By living simply, you live deeply. Tonight, as you rest, imagine your life as a clear pool, uncluttered, calm, simple. Each breath smooths the surface. Each exhale clears away debris. Beneath the stillness, you see the depths of yourself, the essence untouched by noise. In that essence, you discover the richness of simplicity, a life not shallow but vast, not lacking but overflowing with quiet, enduring peace. Desire has always been one of humanity's most persistent companions. It follows us like a shadow, appearing in countless forms. We desire food and shelter, comfort and safety, companionship and love. But beyond these basic needs, desire multiplies endlessly. We want recognition, wealth, success, beauty, status. We desire to hold what we have and to acquire what we do not. The moment one desire is satisfied, another arises, louder than the first, pulling us onward. Lao Tzu saw this clearly and warned that endless wanting creates endless unrest. The Tao Te Ching opens with this truth: when we are free of desire, we can observe the mysteries of life. When caught in desire, we see only appearances. This is not a call to abandon life's pleasures or to live in denial of needs. Rather, it is an invitation to see how desire traps us, chaining us to a cycle of striving that never ends. Desire whispers that satisfaction lies just beyond the horizon. But each time we arrive, the horizon has moved. Imagine a man of Lao Tzu's time, walking through the bustling marketplace. The stalls overflow with fabrics dyed in rich colors, jade ornaments that glimmer, exotic spices whose fragrance fills the air. At first, he wanted only a simple robe. Now, seeing the abundance, he wants finer cloth. Soon, he wants jewelry, then recognition for wearing it, then more wealth to buy still more. What began as a simple need has spiraled into an endless hunger. The man leaves not content, but restless, already longing for tomorrow's purchase. This is how desire breeds unrest. It keeps us living for what is absent, always grasping for what is just out of reach. And because the world is infinite in its offerings, desire never finds completion. There is always another object, another goal, another step higher. Like drinking salt water, the more you consume, the thirstier you become. Desire also clouds perception. When we want something strongly, we see the world only through the lens of that craving. A person consumed with desire for wealth sees opportunities and people not for what they are, but only as means to profit. A person consumed with desire for status measures every interaction as a chance to rise or fall. In this way, desire narrows vision, hiding the deeper mystery of life, blinding us to the Tao's subtle presence. End quote. Yet Lao Tzu does not say that desire itself is evil. To be human is to want, to move toward what is good, to seek nourishment and connection. The problem lies not in desire itself, but in endless desire, in the grasping, the clinging, the belief that satisfaction lies in accumulation. To live by the Tao is to return to sufficiency, to know when enough is enough. Think of water in a cup. If you pour until the cup is full, it serves its purpose. If you keep pouring, the water spills and is wasted. In the same way, desire that seeks what is sufficient brings harmony. Desire that knows no bounds overflows into chaos. The sage, Lao Tzu tells us, is content with little. By being content, they are rich. Consider your own life. How often have you told yourself, "If I just have this, I will be satisfied." And yet, once gained, the satisfaction fades, replaced by a new longing. This cycle keeps the mind restless, the heart unsettled. Sleep is disturbed by worry. Days are filled with striving. But when you pause, when you release the need to grasp, when you allow yourself to rest in enough, peace arises naturally. Lao Tzu often praised the valley, the low place that receives all waters. The valley does not desire to be a mountain. It does not reach or grasp. It accepts what flows into it and is content. In its humility, it becomes vast and fertile. This is the image of a life freed from endless desire, a life that does not compete, but receives. Tonight, as you lie in the quiet, notice the desires that still pull at you, the thought of tomorrow's tasks, the wish for more security, the longing for recognition. Notice how each of these creates tension, a slight tightening in the body, a restlessness in the mind. Then imagine them as leaves floating downstream. You do not need to hold them. The river will carry them away. What remains is the mystery that Lao Tzu spoke of, the Tao revealed when desire subsides. Endless wanting creates endless unrest, but sufficiency creates peace. To desire less is not to be poor. It is to be rich in a different way. Rich in freedom. Rich in stillness. Rich in the ability to taste the sweetness of this very moment, without waiting for another. This is the wisdom of the Tao, to find fullness not in grasping, but in letting go. There is a beauty in stillness that the restless mind often overlooks. In the modern world, noise fills every space: voices, machines, demands, and distractions. Yet even in Lao Tzu's time, the same restlessness stirred. People crowded the courts, debated endlessly, sought to manage and manipulate. Amid all of this, the Tao Te Ching pointed toward another way, the art of non-doing, of resting in stillness, of aligning with the Tao through meditation and quiet. Stillness is not inactivity. It is presence. It is the moment when the surface of the water becomes calm and the depths are revealed. When the mind settles, when striving ceases, when the ego loosens its grip, the Tao shines through. This is why Taoist meditation does not seek to control thoughts, but to let them drift away like clouds. In doing nothing, one discovers everything. Imagine sitting beneath a tree as the sun sets. The air grows cool, the shadows lengthen. The sounds of the day fade into silence. At first, the mind chatters, replaying conversations, planning tomorrow, replaying desires and worries. But if you simply sit, watching your breath, noticing the rustle of leaves, the chatter begins to soften. Thoughts arise, but you do not follow them. They dissolve like mist. Gradually, a spaciousness opens. This is stillness, not empty, but alive, with presence. Lao Tzu's teaching of Wu Wei, effortless action, is rooted in this stillness. When the mind is calm, action arises naturally, without strain, like water flowing downhill. When the mind is restless, action is forced, strained, disconnected. Stillness is the source of effortless movement. Out of stillness, wisdom arises. Out of stillness, compassion arises. Out of stillness, alignment with the Tao arises. The art of non-doing is deeply misunderstood. It is not laziness or withdrawal. It is not abandoning life. It is entering so fully into life that you no longer need to interfere. When you sit in stillness, you do not create the breath, but you join it. You do not command the heart to beat, but you feel its rhythm. You do not control the world, but you notice its flow. And in noticing, you become one with it. The beauty of stillness is also its power. In stillness, you see clearly. Just as muddy water becomes clear when left undisturbed, the mind becomes clear in silence. Problems that seemed tangled reveal simple solutions. Conflicts that felt overwhelming shrink in importance. In stillness, perspective returns. You realize that much of what you carried was unnecessary. Taoist sages often retreated into nature not to escape life, but to rediscover its essence. In the mountains, in the forests, in the valleys, stillness was abundant. The quiet of a river at dawn, the hush of snow on a winter morning, the breath of wind across fields, all of these mirrored the stillness within. By aligning with nature's quiet, the sage aligned with the Tao. As you lie here, you can practice this art yourself. Notice the rise and fall of your breath. You do not need to change it. Simply observe. Each inhale, each exhale, like waves lapping at the shore. Notice the stillness between breaths, the pause where everything is calm. Rest there, in that pause. This is the heart of Taoist meditation. Not striving to achieve something, but resting in what already is. Non-doing does not mean life passes you by. It means you finally see life as it is, without distortion. The beauty of stillness is that it reveals the Tao in every moment. In stillness, the bird's song is more vivid, the river more alive, the stars more radiant. In stillness, even the ordinary becomes sacred. The art of non-doing invites you to release the constant demand to improve, to achieve, to control. It invites you to be, to sit, to breathe, to notice, to rest in the mystery without needing to solve it. This is why Lao Tzu's wisdom is as soothing as it is profound. It does not demand effort, only presence. It does not command striving, only surrender. Tonight, as sleep approaches, you can enter this stillness. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift like clouds. Let your breath guide you into spaciousness. In doing nothing, you are doing the deepest thing. In resting, you are aligning with the Tao. This is the beauty of stillness. Simple, quiet, infinite. To live is always to live among others. Even the hermit who retreats into the mountains carries the voices of family, the memory of society, the presence of all those who shaped him. Lao Tzu understood that harmony is not achieved in isolation, but in the way we exist within the web of human community. His words invite us to see compassion and balance, not as moral obligations imposed from outside, but as the natural expressions of the Tao flowing through us. When you look at a forest, you see this truth clearly. Each tree grows in its own place. reaching for sunlight, drinking from the earth. Yet no tree exists alone. The soil is enriched by fallen leaves. The roots intertwine beneath the surface. The canopy shares shade and shelter for birds and animals. The forest is not a collection of isolated individuals, but a community of interdependence. And, in the same way, we live best when we recognize that our lives are interwoven with others. Lao Tzu taught that the sage does not put himself above the people, but among them. He does not compete, yet he leads. He does not boast, yet he influences. He does not demand, yet he inspires. This is because he lives in balance, balancing his own needs with the needs of the whole, balancing action with non-action, balancing strength with softness. True harmony is not achieved by domination or by sacrifice, but by alignment, by finding the rhythm in which all can flourish together. Compassion, in Taoist thought, arises not from guilt or obligation, but from recognition. When you see yourself in others, compassion flows naturally. Just as the river nourishes the valley without asking for reward, so the heart nourishes others when it sees clearly that their suffering and joy are bound to our own. Lao Tzu called compassion one of the three treasures of life. Without it, we become rigid and cruel. With it, we become resilient and wise. Compassion softens the heart, making it like water, able to carry all things. Balance extends even to conflict. When differences arise, the Tao does not call for victory, but for harmony. Just as yin and yang exist together, so too do opposing forces in human relationships. To insist on one side winning is to disturb the balance. To allow space for both is to restore harmony. The sage, therefore, does not cling to opinions, does not insist on being right, does not elevate himself over others. He allows, he listens, he moves gently toward resolution, like a stream finding its way through stones. In daily life, harmony with others can be practiced in simple ways. To listen without judgment, to speak with honesty but without harm, to allow others to be themselves without trying to control them, to live in such a way that your presence brings calm rather than disturbance. Lao Tzu's wisdom reminds us that harmony is not about making everyone the same, but about honoring difference while remaining connected. Just as the strings of a lute must be tuned to different pitches to create music, so harmony among people arises not from sameness, but from balance. As you rest tonight, imagine yourself in a village of old China. The houses are simple, the air is filled with the scent of wood smoke. Children play near the well. Elders sit in the shade. Each person has a role. The farmer tends the fields. The potter shapes clay. The weaver creates cloth. No one is alone, and yet no one is diminished. Together, they create a whole greater than themselves. This is natural community, the living expression of harmony. In our modern world, the same lesson remains. To live in harmony is to remember that your well-being is bound to the well-being of others, that your peace is deepened when you help create peace for those around you. Lao Tzu's wisdom flows quietly into this truth. Compassion, balance, and natural community are not lofty ideals, but the most natural way of being human. There is a certain irony in wisdom. The deeper it grows, the more it appears to the world as foolishness. Lao Tzu knew this paradox well. The sage lives in simplicity, embraces humility, avoids competition, and speaks in riddles. To the ambitious, this looks like weakness. To the clever, it looks like ignorance. To the powerful, it looks like passivity. Yet what appears foolish is often the highest wisdom, because it does not play by the world's narrow rules. Imagine a village where everyone rushes to accumulate wealth, each household competing to display their possessions. In the middle of this bustle lives an old man who wears plain clothes, eats simple meals, and spends his time watching the clouds. The others laugh at him. He is poor, they say. He is lazy. He has no ambition. And yet, when hardship comes, when famine strikes, when disputes break out, it is this quiet man to whom they turn. For his heart is calm, his mind is clear, and his wisdom, though cloaked in apparent foolishness, offers guidance that endures. The Tao Te Ching often praises the uncarved block, the simple thing unshaped by human cleverness. To the world, it looks plain, unremarkable, even useless. But precisely in its plainness lies infinite potential. In the same way, the sage seems ordinary, unimpressive, even laughable. But in his ordinariness lies freedom. He is not trapped by pride or desire, and so he is open to the Tao. Wisdom often appears foolish because it refuses to conform. The world values loud voices. Wisdom speaks softly. The world prizes speed. Wisdom waits patiently. The world seeks control. Wisdom lets go. To those who are trapped in competition and striving, this looks like failure. But the sage knows that in yielding lies strength. In stillness lies clarity. In simplicity lies depth. Think of water once more. It flows downward, toward the low places. To those who worship heights, this looks foolish. Yet, in flowing downward, water nourishes all things. It fills valleys, sustains crops, shapes landscapes. The sage, too, flows downward, taking the humble position, appearing small. Yet in that humility, he becomes vast, like the sea that receives all rivers. In our own lives, wisdom can take the form of slowing down when others hurry, of listening when others speak, of forgiving when others seek revenge. These acts may seem naive, even weak, but over time, they reveal their strength. Forgiveness dissolves cycles of harm. Listening creates true understanding. Patience allows solutions to emerge. What looks foolish to the impatient is revealed as wisdom to the enduring. There is also a freedom in being mistaken for a fool. When others underestimate you, you are free from their expectations. You do not need to prove yourself. Do not need to defend an image. You can live lightly, unnoticed, guided by the Tao rather than by reputation. In this way, the sage appears foolish, but is freer than the cleverest man in the room. As you close your eyes tonight, you may feel the pull of the world's expectations, the need to prove, to impress, to succeed. Let them fall away, like masks dropped to the floor. You do not need to appear wise. You do not need to impress. True wisdom is not in appearance, but in alignment with the Tao. And if the world mistakes that for foolishness, let it. For in the end, the fool who lives by the Tao is wiser than the clever man who chases illusions. This is the paradox of wisdom. The sage looks like a fool, but endures like the mountain, flows like the river, drifts like the cloud. In foolishness, he finds freedom. In freedom, he finds the Tao. Time is the great river in which all things drift. It carries us forward, whether we wish to move or not. From the rising of the sun to its setting, from the sprouting of seeds to the fading of autumn leaves, time is change in motion. Lao Tzu looked at this ever-shifting world and did not resist it. Instead, he saw in it the essence of the Tao, which teaches that nothing is permanent, and that peace comes when we learn to move with the flow instead of fighting against it. To human eyes, change often feels like loss. We want to cling to the youth of our bodies, the strength of our limbs, the freshness of beginnings. We want to hold on to moments of joy, to preserve them like pressed flowers. Yet the Tao whispers that beauty exists only because things change. The flower blooms, and then it fades. If it bloomed forever, we would not see its beauty. It would simply become background. Its fragility, its fleetingness, gives it meaning. Consider the flowing river. You may sit on its bank and look at the surface, but never again will you see the same water twice. The current moves endlessly, carrying away what was, bringing forth what is new. Life is the same. The moment you live now has never existed before and will never exist again. To cling to it is to suffer. To let it flow is to be free. Lao Tzu's wisdom teaches that impermanence is not something to fear, but to embrace. The seasons turn, and each brings its gifts. Winter's quiet, spring's renewal, summer's abundance, autumn's harvest. Each depends on the others. If one season tried to remain forever, the balance would collapse. In the same way, our lives are seasons. Childhood passes into youth, youth into maturity, maturity into age. Each stage holds its treasures, its lessons, its beauties. To cling to one is to miss the gifts of the others. Time's flow also teaches humility. We may strive for power, but dynasties rise and fall. We may build monuments, but even stone wears down. The Tao reminds us that nothing lasts forever. Not wealth, not fame, not even sorrow. This truth, if resisted, is painful, but if accepted, it becomes liberation. When you know that both joy and grief will pass, you learn to hold them gently, without clinging, without despair. Imagine yourself in a garden. Around you, flowers open, bees hum, leaves rustle in the breeze. You notice one blossom that is just beginning, its petals unfolding. Another flower is already fading, petals falling softly to the ground. Both are beautiful, one in its beginning, the other in its ending. This is the truth of impermanence. Beauty exists at every stage of change. The Tao invites us to see not only the blossoming, but the falling, not only the rising, but the fading, as part of the same flow. At night, as you lie in stillness, you may feel the presence of time in your own body, the heartbeat that has carried you through countless days, the breath that has never stopped since the moment of your birth. You cannot hold a single breath. No matter how hard you try, it must be released, so that the next one can arrive. This rhythm is the rhythm of the Tao, the rhythm of impermanence. Life itself is possible only because of flow. The wisdom of time, change, and flow is this. Let go of resistance. Do not cling to what has passed. Do not grasp at what has not yet come. Rest in the current of now, trusting that the Tao carries you as surely as it carries the rivers and the stars. Nothing is permanent, and in that truth lies peace. Death has always stood as the deepest mystery, the shadow at the edge of life. For many, it is a source of fear, a great ending, a vanishing into nothing. But Lao Tzu saw it differently. To him, death was not an enemy, not even an interruption, but simply part of the great cycle of the Tao. Just as the leaf falls to nourish the soil, just as day gives way to night, so life gives way to death, and death in turn nourishes life again. In Taoist thought, death is not final. It is a transformation, a return. The Tao Te Ching speaks of returning to the root, of coming back to the source. To die is to flow back into the vastness from which we came, to dissolve into the same mystery that gave us birth. The Tao has no beginning and no end, and we are part of that timelessness. Think of a wave rising on the ocean. For a time it has a shape, a crest, a movement of its own. Then it falls, blending back into the sea. The water has not disappeared. It has simply changed form. So it is with us. Our bodies rise from the elements of earth, air, water, and fire. We live for a time, with names and stories and identities. Then we return, dissolving into the elements once more. The water returns to the sea, the breath to the air, the flesh to the soil, the spark to the great mystery. To resist death is to resist the cycle. To fear death is to fear the natural order of the Tao. But to accept it is to live more fully. When you know that life is fleeting, you savor it more deeply. When you know that every breath is borrowed, you treasure each one. Death gives life its intensity, its urgency, its sacredness. Lao Tzu urged us not to cling, not even to our own existence. Just as endless desire creates unrest, so too does the refusal to accept mortality. The sage embraces death, as he embraces life, seeing both as expressions of the Tao. In doing so, he lives without fear. He does not waste his days in anxious resistance, but moves lightly, freely, knowing that when the time comes, he will return to the source. Imagine autumn in the valley. The leaves fall, covering the ground in gold and red. They do not resist, do not cling to the branches, but drift softly, trusting the wind. In their falling, they become nourishment for new life to come. In their surrender, they complete the cycle. So too can we approach death, not with clinging, but with trust. At night, when you close your eyes, it is like a small death, a surrender into darkness. And yet, each morning you awaken renewed. In this daily rhythm, you are already practicing the great return. Sleep teaches you that letting go is not to vanish, but to be restored. Death, too, is a letting go, a return to the infinite stillness of the Tao. As you rest now, you might feel the presence of mortality not as something frightening, but as something tender. Each breath is precious, because it will not last forever. Each heartbeat is a gift because it is finite. And when the final breath comes, it will be part of the same flow that has always carried you. Life and death are not two, but one cycle, like inhaling and exhaling, like rising and falling, like day and night. The Tao holds both life and death in its embrace. To live with this awareness is to live in peace. To die with this awareness is to return home. Life often feels like a movement away from simplicity. As children, our needs are few, our joys immediate, our presence natural. We play without asking why, laugh without thinking of tomorrow, cry without shame, and fall asleep when tired. There is no separation between ourselves and the flow of life. Yet as we grow, complexity gathers around us. Expectations, ambitions, judgments, and responsibilities layer upon us like garments we never asked to wear. We learn to strive, to compare, to grasp, and to cling. We learn to complicate what was once simple. Lao Tzu saw this process clearly and reminded us that wisdom is not found in adding more, but in returning to the source, the place of simplicity where all things begin. To return to the source is to move back toward authenticity. The Tao Te Ching speaks often of the uncarved block, the piece of wood in its raw form, not yet shaped by human hands. In its plainness lies purity. Once carved, it becomes useful in only one way, limited by its form. But in its simplicity, it contains infinite potential. We, too, are born uncarved, open to the whole of life. The return to the source is not about becoming childish, but about rediscovering that same openness beneath the layers of complexity we have gathered. Think of water as it flows from a mountain spring. At the beginning, it is clear, fresh, untainted. As it travels, it collects soil, leaves, and debris, and its surface may appear clouded. Yet if you trace it back, the spring remains pure. The journey of return is like walking upstream, back through the noise, back through the clutter, until we find again the stillness at the beginning. The source is not behind us in time, it is beneath us in essence. It is always here, waiting in the silence beneath thought, in the space beneath striving. To return to it is not to abandon life, but to see life in its true nature. Complexity is not wrong, but it is not the whole story. The source is simplicity, and it is simplicity that gives meaning to complexity. We live in an age that celebrates complication. The more complex the system, the more impressive it seems. Yet we often find ourselves weary under the weight of too many choices, too many obligations, too much noise. Lao Tzu reminds us that peace lies in returning to what is essential: to eat when hungry, to sleep when tired, to speak only when words are needed, to live in harmony with the rhythm of nature. The return to the source is not about deprivation, it is about wholeness. When we no longer divide ourselves with endless complications, we find again the quiet fullness that was always there. Imagine sitting beside a river as dusk falls. The sounds of the world grow quiet. The air cools. The sky deepens. For a moment, the mind softens. The layers of the day fall away, and what remains is simple: your breath, the river's flow, the fading light. In that moment, you feel closer to the source, not because you traveled somewhere, but because you allowed yourself to return to what is already here. The journey back to simplicity is also the journey back to truth. When we strip away the excess, we see more clearly what matters. A simple act of kindness holds more weight than grand gestures. A simple meal shared with love nourishes more than a feast eaten in greed. A simple life aligned with the Tao brings more peace than a complex one lived in pursuit of recognition. Complexity dazzles the eye, but simplicity feeds the heart. As you listen now, you can feel this return happening. The day's complexity fades. The lists, the demands, the ambitions, all gently dissolve in the quiet of night. What remains is simple: the rise and fall of breath, the steady rhythm of the body, the spaciousness of awareness. This is the return to the source, the rediscovery of simplicity beneath it all. And in that simplicity, you are not diminished, you are restored. There comes a time when words must give way to silence, when thought must give way to presence, when striving must give way to surrender. The Tao is not something to be achieved, not something to be grasped, but something to be entered, like a river entered by drifting. To drift into the Tao is to let go of the self, to release the illusion of separation, and to float in timeless peace. Imagine yourself lying on the surface of a calm lake. The water holds you effortlessly. You do not need to kick or paddle. You do not need to resist. The more you try to control, the more you sink. But when you relax, when you surrender, the water carries you. This is the image of the Tao. To drift into it is to trust that you are already held, already supported, already part of the vastness. Letting go of the self does not mean losing identity in despair. It means loosening the grip of ego, the restless voice that says, I must, I should, I need, I fear. When that voice softens, what remains is spaciousness. The Tao holds you as the sky holds clouds, as the earth holds roots, as silence holds sound. In drifting, you discover freedom. Timeless peace arises. When we cease measuring, the clock ticks, but the Tao does not. The past has already dissolved into mist. The future has not yet arrived. What remains is the eternal present, the only place where peace can be found. To drift into the Tao is to sink into that presence, to let the mind rest, to let the body soften, to let awareness open like the night sky. In this drifting, there is no struggle. The river flows without effort. The stars shine without intention. The breath moves without command. You are part of this same flow. You do not need to prove, to grasp, to cling. You only need to allow. The Tao does the rest. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine yourself carried gently downstream. The current is slow, steady, embracing. On either side, the banks fade into shadow. Above, the sky opens wide, filled with stars. You are not separate from the river, not separate from the sky. You are part of the same unfolding, the same mystery. The more you release, the lighter you become, until you are simply drifting, floating, weightless. This is the closing meditation. To know that you are not apart, but at home. To know that you are not abandoned, but carried. To know that in letting go, you gain everything. The Tao is timeless, and in drifting into it, you discover the peace that was always here, waiting. Let yourself go. Let yourself drift. Let yourself be. The Tao holds you now, and in its embrace, you rest in timeless peace. Thank you for joining this journey into the wisdom of Lao Tzu and the flow of the Tao. Now, allow your breath to soften, your body to grow heavy, and your thoughts to drift away into peaceful sleep. Rest deeply, you deserve it. If you're still awake, you can gently click on one of the 2 videos on your screen to continue this calming experience. And if you'd like more stories and philosophies to fall asleep to, remember to subscribe and join this growing community of dreamers. Sleep well, and may peace carry you through the night.